It's unfettered 3. It features an Al-Anon short story that takes place before Sword of Shannara. So for those of you guys that like Al-Anon, this is a way to get more of him. And of course, Terry has the Scar Invasion here. We're kind of in the middle of the year for him, so his new book comes out May 28th. It's The Steel Assassin. And look at that. He waves it in front of you like you won't rush the stage and maul him to get it. Without further ado, I'll just say that the man sitting next to me, he's sold over 50 million copies of his books worldwide in a career that's spanned more than 40 years. Many of the writers in the industry, and specifically in this genre, look to him as somebody that the reason why they're doing what they're doing is because Terry Brooks helped them, have a voice of their own. So I guess I should say, welcome, Terry Brooks. So
thanks.
We're going to obviously have a Q&A here in 30 minutes or so. So get your questions ready. In the meantime, I'll ask some questions and hopefully we'll get to some answers.
You can expect anything you like. One never knows about answers. Is this working? I guess it is. Okay, good. Thank you.
Let's talk about the big elephant in the room right now. You're ending Shannara. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I think people are used to it by now. Because it's time. It's time. I need to move on. So I'm writing this one is done, obviously, and I'm writing the last one right now. I'm about 10 chapters from the end. And when you get 10 chapters from the end of a 30-book set with 40 years behind you, you reflect a little bit on the whole thing. And my reflection is, thank God. It's over. I'm going to move on to something else because it really is time. I've enjoyed writing this series. I'm sure I'll go back and write some other things, but I've got a whole bunch of new material I want to turn into books, and it's just really is time to let go.
So the third book, like I said, comes out May 28th. This is kind of a departure for you, though, because a third book usually means the end of a set, right? Terry is the trilogy writer. How did this become 4 books very early on?
Money. I needed more money. No, I don't know. I had this happen before with Heritage, which started out also as a trilogy. I came into this, I had no idea about the trilogy business. I knew it was out there, but it quickly became apparent with Lord of the Rings and so forth that trilogies were in unless you were going to do a long series. So I thought, well, okay, I better write a trilogy. And that worked out fine in that set. They were independent books, independent stories, different characters, and to some extent. But when I started Heritage, I was really writing about a much broader topic, and I knew from the beginning about the first chapter that sort of sets up, and then I knew I wanted the whole thing about the return of the Druids, which was what the Druid of Shannara was about. And then I thought, oh yeah, but what about the elves? The elves disappeared. When are they coming back? And I thought, well, they can come back in the last book. And then it quickly became apparent that they could not come back in the last book because there wasn't room for them. That story was a separate story. So I think these things are organic, and when you're putting them together, you can envision them in a particular way when you start out. But somewhere along the way, they're going to take their own form and their own path, and then you have to adjust your thinking and your plans for what's really going to work the best.
This last series is titled "The Fall of Shannara." Excuse me. Yeah. And the first 3 books in the series are very Terry Brooksian in size, but this last book that you're writing is a little bit longer. Can you talk a little bit about what money doesn't drive you in writing a longer book? So why is this last book going to be longer, and how long do you think it'll be?
Bite your tongue. I think my editor's sitting out there. Money's important, really, really important. Well, really, all joking aside, there are a couple things at work. You sort of want the last book to be something special, So one of the ways to make it special is to make it larger. And I haven't written a really big book since Sword. Everything since then has gone down to bit by bit through the first 3 to what I did in Heritage, where we were basically talking around 400 pages. And that was because of the nature of the stories I was telling, which were no longer single big books, but a big book split into pieces so that it took place over a period of time. And this was to facilitate a couple things. First of all, people don't like it when you don't write your books on a steady basis. And I wrote Sword in '77, and I should say I published it in '77, published Elfstones in '82, published Wish Song in '85, and that particular line was starting to look, a little grim. I thought, well, at this rate, I'm never going to get anything done. So I just decided to start writing them where I broke them up into series. And I thought that was more interesting anyway. Plus, I wanted to do cliffhangers. Right? And the best way to write cliffhangers is to write them at the end of a book that isn't finished, but then you have to finish it up because people get mad. And you can think of some of those people, can't you? And I thought, no, I want to, I want to make it a manageable process where I do a book a year. That was kind of my, artificial goal, and that has pretty much been the way it's worked out for me. So that was the thought there. Then, cutting back for just a moment to this last book, the story really ballooned to some extent to what I intended to do. This isn't a case of saying, I'm going to drag this out as long as I can because this is the end, I can't stand it. No, I want it done. I'm down to 10 chapters. I want it finished. But the story, because of the different storylines, there's at least 3 or 4 different plot points all the way through in different quests and so forth. So I needed to wrap it all up, or at least to where I think it's wrapped up that you will say, oh, damn, or you'll say, oh, great, or something. So that's kind of where I've been at.
How does it feel to be writing, like these next 10 chapters that you're going to write? Like, do you think it's going to be, you're going to write them like you usually write?
Yeah.
Or is there any emotion that plays into this
No.
for you at the end here?
I think...
Do you have a heart inside your chest, sir?
No. I think, a Brooks book is a Brooks book. You can tell right away. I write in a particular style. I use particular language. My imagery is very familiar. The type of story I tell, I think, is very similar from one book to the next, even though the plot line differs, because that's the kind of story that the genre series offers. But at the same time, when you get to the end, there's a lot of different conflicted feelings, but I have always felt a certain amount of regret and satisfaction at the end of writing a book, because every book should be your best effort. So, you don't say, oh, well, I'll just float through this one, and I don't care whether it's done or not. That's it. I don't think you ever want to do that. So I feel about this one pretty much the same way I felt about all the others, and I'll have lots of time for regrets later if I need to have them, or, pondering the wonderfulness of this last book.
Are you going to tour for that last book? You might get an earful from your readers.
Yeah, no, I might. I always do. I'll be touring this year with the 3rd book, and the following year with the last one, I'm quite certain I'll be doing a bunch of stops along the way. I do the same thing all the time. I go to a couple conventions like this one. I'll be at this one. I'll be at Denver Comic-Con, and I'll be, I forget, a couple of writers' conferences and things like that. And then I'll take 2 or 3 weeks on the road to go around with the book. And, of course, I'll be here in the Seattle area. I'll be in Portland as well, and maybe a couple other places. I don't know. If somebody suggests something, I always pay attention to it. And I looked at the map a couple weeks ago, and I said, where have I not been lately? Well, of course, lots of places, but I noticed Iowa. When was the last time I was in Iowa? And I thought, I don't even know where Iowa is anymore. I'm not sure. So I thought, well, I'll go to Iowa. That'll be kind of fun.
So,
last year I was in the South. That was really interesting. I went to Oklahoma, Texas, Florida, Georgia. I don't know, maybe somewhere else. At any rate, and then flew back to the West Coast. And that was very different, being down in the South, because I haven't been there for a long time. So I got to spend some time sampling Southern cooking and, just visiting with people down there. But here's the thing. You know, I'm a political animal. I read the papers all the time. I'm enmeshed in what I read. Mostly I get fueled up by bunches of it. But when I go places, despite how you feel about anything, people are people. They're always the same, and they're always nice. You know, people are not looking to make your life miserable, as in any form. They really aren't, and they do little kindnesses and so forth, and they behave, and I like reassuring myself that that is true, because that's what I believe.
So you still enjoy touring, basically?
No, I hate it. No, I do enjoy touring, actually. It's the only time, like now. I mean, this is when I get to talk to people on a large-scale basis and share ideas and hear their enthusiasm about the books, because, you know, otherwise I don't hear this. Shawn intercepts all my email. He does not show it to me. You know, he just intercepts it and takes care of it, and he signs my name, and then that's the end of it right there. And I don't do much with regular mail anymore, of course, because I just don't have time. So how do I know what's going on out there? You know, I just assume that this is the way it is. You know, it's you know, it's faith-based assumptions on people's attitudes, or something like that.
Speaking of.
So
I've read The Steel Assassin. I've been lucky to be able to do that. And my favorite character in this set is Driscoll Ark, who is the newest druid that's taken on the mantle of Ardrees. And he's doing the best that he can to stop. Well, I'll let you guys read the next book before I even say that. When you're building a character like a druid, for instance, you've had a number of really, really great druids in your series. How do you begin building that character right at the beginning?
Well, I build all my characters the same way. I look for the flaws. In which way is this character flawed? And I start at that point, and then I work my way up to what are their strengths. Because really, as readers, when we're reading about books and characters, what's interesting is what's flawed about the characters. You know, this is what sets books apart. The characters are developed in depth in a way that says, okay, we can see where their strengths lie, and if they've got magic, they've got a certain amount of power, but how are they undermined by the fact that they have the use of the power? And that's always been true about magic, of course, as we know. If you use magic, there's a price, there's consequences. And this comes from years of observing presidents and seeing what being in office does to them, you know, which is it ages them about 8 to 10 years and 2. And I feel like that's kind of the way power works. It's an evil. It enables you to do a great deal, but it is an evil. Has evil effects upon you as a person. So that's where I start, and then I go from there to decide. Okay, so he's flawed. Now, how are we going to use that in the storyline?
When you're in a book, but a book has a lot of characters in it. Do you have to wait until you have enough characters kind of in the back of your mind before you feel like you can start writing the story, or are you more plot-driven when you're starting a new book?
I think you have to have the whole piece put together, you know, the whole pie, all the pieces in there, because I think I can't function as a writer just writing off into the void. I'm not that kind of writer, but there are writers that work that way. They just start writing and see what comes out. I pretty much want to know where I'm going, first of all. You know, what am I writing to? And so I always know my endings. This is not to say now, when I get there, I'll keep that ending. I might not. I might decide, whoa, wrong ending. Where were you going? But basically, I like to have that direction, or that destination in mind, I should say. Then I start looking for the directions. So how do the characters get you there, or not get you there? Who do they meet along the way? How is everybody impacted? You know, one of the rules about writing fiction is that in the course of the story, from the beginning to the end, all the characters of consequence must change. They must grow. They must work. They must not grow and you know, disintegrate in some way. They die. They whatever. But this all has to be there.
I'm so happy you didn't say all the characters have to die, because that's a normal Brooks book, right?
Well, it was
not all of them.
Oh no, I was much worse. When I wrote Sword of Shannara, I killed virtually everybody. I don't know who was left alive. I think maybe Shea Olmsford, but nobody else. And my editor said, thou shalt not kill all your characters. Go back there and rewrite this. So I did. I went back and I salvaged a few of them. Yeah, and you don't want to do that because the point is that it's kind of to me, it's nihilistic to say, okay, and then everybody died. You know, how good does that make you feel at the end? Like, I'm sorry I wasted my 3 days reading this damn book. You don't want that. I don't like that. I want there to be a resolution, but I don't want it to come at the cost of everybody being killed. And I don't want anyone ever to be killed where it doesn't serve a purpose. There has to be a reason for it beyond just the author didn't feel good today, so he killed off a character.
So, Shanrell launched your career, obviously, but you changed. You wrote a very different kind of book called Magic Kingdom for Sale Sold. I was hoping some woo-woos out there. All right, good. I love that series, by the way. What precipitated that change after you'd finished Wish Song and writing something kind of more lighthearted and funny? What brought that on? How did that start?
I just got fed up with Shanrell. I had been writing it since, I think, '68. And so by the time Wish Song came out, it was '85. And I was thinking, I cannot write one more sentence in a Shanrell book right now. And that's when I went to my editor and said, I'm going to try something different. And I didn't want to write another epic fantasy series because, you know, that way lies madness. So I got involved in the idea of writing the Magic Kingdom series, and then I felt like I needed to give it a leg up, so I wrote 3 books at once to get that going, and then went back from there. And that's what I've done, as you know. I did the same thing when I took on Word and Void. I'm not sure I have the order right here, but the 3 Word and Void books. It was the same thing. I wanted to write something different. And then I wrote Star Wars and Hook, well, I guess before there with Hook, just because I thought, you know, this would be interesting. I want to try this and see what there is. And then more recently when I wrote Street Freaks, when I said, well, that's it. I'm going to write a science fiction thriller. You know, I can do this. I have a story. I'm going to drop the magic, and I'm going to write this kind of story. And I felt that was something I had to do. And as a writer, it's important that you stretch your muscles, creatively speaking, and color outside the lines once in a while and do something different. Sometimes this is not a popular idea with the publishing house, which wants you to write in the area where you have an established audience, and you can understand this. You know, they want you to do this because then you will sell books, and then everybody makes money, and this is good. But sometimes, creatively speaking, you have to write something different. Just because it's an intriguing idea, it's something that's been eating at you, which means it needs to be let out into the light.
All right, well, let's talk about that just really quick here. So Street Freaks published in October. University Bookstore has copies so that you guys know. Some of you might not know that it exists. What was that initial need? I mean, other than doing something new, what was it about Street Freaks that grabbed you, that you wanted to spend, 6 to 10 months of your life writing it?
You know, I'm not sure anymore. You'd think I'd remember something like that, but it was a whole bunch of things at the time that came together that made me say, I want to write a story that harkens back to when all the characters were young, as they were, mostly all young, as they were in Sword and even Elfstones. And I wanted to write something about the future. No doubt this was once again a politically inspired thing, but I know I was reading at the time about the way the world will change, and I thought about, well, how's the future going to look? And I want to write something about that. And the other thing that got to me was I decided I wanted to write about prejudice, because prejudice is out there. You may have noticed, and I wanted to write about the ways in which our attitudes about prejudice would change, which means I wanted to invent a new prejudice, because we're finally going to get tired of all the ones we've had going around and around for a while. I'm already sick of them. I wanted to write about something different, so I thought, well, what's the next level? Well, the next level for me, looking at what the science articles have to say, is going to be in genetics. It's going to be in genetics. And we're going to have people that aren't exactly like us, or maybe even created the same way we were. It's going to happen, you know, and we're seeing already things about it. We're going to see medically enhanced people who are going to have artificial limbs, maybe artificial bodies. Who knows? We have AI already in place, but it's going to become more sophisticated. It's going to happen in the next 50 years. I'm sure of it. So I thought, all right, so what's going to happen then? Well, some people are going to think this is a really bad idea, and I don't want these people around me. And they're going to get marginalized in the same way that minorities and the gay community, well, all minorities are marginalized for a while. And how's that going to play out? And of course, in my world, my perfect little world, which is not necessarily widely accepted, everybody gets along. You know, everybody gets along because, after all, we're all trying for the same things. So I just figured, you know, I'm going to write about this and see how it plays out. And that was where the story came from.
All right. And you returned to Word and Void, actually, in this last year, with a novella that will now appear in a collection from Del Rey Books in fall 2020. And
Oh, thank you. Fall of 2020. I actually, well, I didn't beg exactly. I whined around a lot with my editor, Ann, and said, you know, I got all this short fiction that's all over the place. Some of it's only been in ebooks. Some of it's been in other collections. Some of it we've done with Del Rey. How about if we collect it all together and put it in a compilation? Because I'm not sure how much more short fiction I'm going to do anyway. And she said, yeah, you know, that's a great idea. Why don't you write some new stuff, too? I knew that was coming. So I decided that after some discussion, we decided that I would write a Word and Void, I guess it would be a novella, that would become the centerpiece for the collection. So it is a story about another Knight of the Word in a different situation with a different set of circumstances, but that deals with the same issues that Running with the Demon and the other books in the trilogy did. And then I wrote a couple more, Shannerous, and I also had already written one, Magic Kingdom one, and I've written another one. So they're all in there, and I think there's 11 or 12 of them altogether. Right. Kind of a good idea. I thought everybody says, well, you know, this is great. You have your books online, but I don't have online, or I don't want my book online. I want my book in a book form with paper. So I thought, fine, that's fair. So now's the chance, right?
So we briefly touched on Landover, and we talked about Shanra a little bit. I mean, the question's going to pop up, so I'm just going to ask it. I'm just going to put Hollywood question mark. Is there anything going on in
question?
Hollywood? Yeah, that's a question.
Hollywood, what's to like?
It's going to come up, so I'll ask it.
Well, you know, it's like, let me spin yesterday's record here back, huh? The Shanra Chronicles is officially dead, but the living dead might rise again. There's some talk about bringing it back in a different format. So what am I going to say? I don't know. I am promised many things. I am told many things. Do I believe any of it? No. I have learned from hard lessons. Don't believe all the stuff they say. And in the meantime, Magic Kingdom is still alive and well. I think you know, these days we're not looking at movies so much anymore. We're looking at TV shows, because trying to do movies is more difficult. Trying to get anything made from a movie is more difficult, particularly for somebody who writes a lot of the same thing over and over. It lends itself much more to TV adaptation. So, you know, I'm rolling along with it. I'm waiting for the call. Call me up. I'm here. And then we'll see what happens. But I can't say anything positive about it right now because I don't know. And it's like everybody's really willing to tell you how good looking your child is until they leave the room and they say, what an ugly little... It's sort of like that. I love your writing. Your writing's wonderful. And they got in the room and they said, man, we got to change that puppy.
So you'll be finishing this last Shanra book sometime in the next 2 months. you can be doing anything after that. What are your plans coming up next couple of years?
I actually talked with editor Ann and said, what would you most like in all the world besides me to go away? And she said, in writing really, and she said, well, I'd like a big new fantasy series, or maybe I suggested it, I can't remember now. But that's where it came in, and so we decided on that as being the approach. And I felt, yeah, I'm ready to do that. I'm ready to write something, but not genre and not in the same vein. Something different, with a different setting and a different emphasis and a different format entirely. So that's what I'm going to write. And I pitched a 8-page, pitching at my age. I pitched something that she and the other editors at Del Rey could get behind, and I actually wrote out a chapter to start it off. And so now I'm just sitting on it until I'm writing down things every so often. I think the way you do as a writer, this would be cool, I'm going to do this, or this is a good idea for this character. So once I get up and running after finishing this, probably in the fall, I'll start work on it and try to get the first book out by 2021, before I turn 80.
What do you think, after 40 years, or more than 40 years, Lester Del Rey was such a huge influence on you and other writers of that time. What do you think, if Lester was here today, he would say about your career right now?
Well, for as acerbic and difficult as he was also generous with his praise and compliments too. So he would say, you've had a good run, you should be happy about that, you should take it easy now, yes, you should write something else, but you don't have to keep the same pace. And it's hard to say, because the trouble is that his world isn't here anymore. The way that the world worked for editors in the 70s and into the 80s isn't here anymore. And the whole social media presence wasn't there, which has changed everything. The way in which we publish, the way in which there's interaction, there's a synergy between all the different formats that we're in. The idea of having a book with a movie or a TV show, with a game, and so on and so forth, that's all new and wasn't there in his day, except for 1 or 2 or 3, major top writers, and a particular type of subject that would lend itself to that. And fantasy, fantasy really began with Del Rey. Del Rey, they were the spearhead for fantasy in the 70s and into the 80s. And they brought in many of the new writers, and the first wave, really, of the writers who made an impact and showed that there could be life after Tolkien. It wasn't just me, it was others too. Sometimes I felt like it was just me, or I was a scapegoat, but in any case, that's the way it was. And now it's all different. So I think that it's hard to say, when you're gone, everything's going to change again, because things change all the time. And the way that the world reacts to news, or how it gets its news, or how what they were doing with social media, or how books, the formats, and so forth, all going to be different. And so you have to live in the time you're in and let the rest of it take care of itself. Yeah. So I don't know what you say. Get to work.
So those of you with questions, those of you with questions, there's a mic up here. Feel free to stand up and ask Terry any of your questions. And while you guys are gathering, should you read? Do you guys want Terry to read something from the new book that comes out? Yeah? Louder. Louder. Okay. I guess you're doomed.
Be careful what you wish for. If I read this, I'm giving away a major plot point. But it is chapter 1, page 1. Right? Okay. This is the first, about a first page and a half of Steel Assassin. Ooh, bright lights. Yeah. A winter tableau, stark and compelling. Not 100 yards from the west gates of the fortress walls of Paranor, a small clearing is revealed within the giant old growth, barely visible through the curtain of a new snowfall. An earlier snow leaves the clearing and the surrounding forest in a foot-deep covering of white. Darkness no longer shrouds the world, as the night has diminished, and the first glimmerings of dawn have surfaced on the distant horizon. All is silent in the forest. Birds and animals alike have gone still. All is sleep claimed and frozen in place. There is an unnatural feeling in the air as Tavo Kanan staggers forward, thrown off balance by the force of his thrust. He has slipped from hiding, crept up on his sister from behind, bearing in his hand the legendary blade known as the Steel, and has driven it in through her back. The killing blow is the culmination of a journey he has pursued since he decided that she betrayed him through abandonment and neglect and therefore must die. The satisfaction he feels when he strikes her down is immense, a release of pent-up frustration and rage that has haunted him for weeks. Here at last is an end to it. Here at last is the revenge he has been seeking. Yet even as he revels in his success, he experiences an unexpected sense of loss. His sister is the last of his family, the last connection to anything from his old life, and a sudden welling up of doubt and deep mistrust of his own feelings infuses him. By killing her, he brings about a desperately needed resolution to his madness. Or does he? What has he truly done? A split second later, his feelings are scattered to the winds blowing softly around him. Something is wrong, he realizes. Arnold?
So I twisted Terry's arm to read that passage because the end of Scar Invasion was so torturous.
You wait till a new book. That much worse, much, much worse.
All right, so we'll start with our first question. Yes, sir.
So,
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
There we go. I want to go back to something earlier you said. So I have been visiting you long enough to know that you like to have fun, that you're kind of a fun guy with jokes and stuff like that. So I want to know, you said you're a political animal, and it's 2019, and you want to go to Iowa. Anything else you want to announce today, Terry?
I thought it was a refuge. I thought that's a place I could go where everybody would be down home and you know, very quiet. And no?
Are you going to make a bumper sticker that says
So
Brooks
I already
2020?
have. I mean, it's every 4 years I make the same sticker, but.
Well, I am actually not the political animal in the family. It's my wife. She's rabid, but in a nice way. I just, you know, I like what I can take from the arena. It's the Christians and the Lions, as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm out there watching it all and taking down notes and making, you know, I don't like people mistreating other people. I don't like bullies. I don't like, you know, having been a small kid who suffered at the hands of bullies. I don't much like them. In any category, and I don't like the way that the whole political system has become so polarized and rabid, and nobody wants to listen to anybody else. It's just ridiculous. So, you know, I thought, when I say I'm a political animal, it just means that I have a strong reaction to this, and when I have a strong reaction, I look to write about it.
I do remember in the past you talked about the same thing with Armageddon's Children, and I believe you were in two books when you said, what the heck, I'll just blow the world up. So.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, it seems like a good idea every now and then, and at least in the book. I think I really, in every book I write, I'm grinding an axe. There's no question about it. I won't pretend I'm not. I mean, I wrote I wrote Heritage Quadrilogy to talk about destruction of the environment, which being a West Coaster up in the Northwest, I feel strongly about. When I wrote Olive Green and Olmsford, that was all about redemption, transgression and redemption. You know, how far can you go before you've gone too far? In the Christian religion, we know sort of how that works, but it's not clear. You know, which part do we believe of what was written about what's the way we're supposed to be? Do we forgive everybody? Do we forgive them unconditionally? Or how does the world really work? It doesn't work that way.
Right.
At least I haven't seen any evidence of it, so I decided I was going to write something more about how you find redemption in this world. Because to me, and the other thing is I'm always writing about what I think people want to know, the questions they ask themselves all the time. You know, and a lot of it's sparked by what's happening nationally or worldwide, what we see. You know, how do we feel about this idea of forgiveness? How do we feel about the idea that anyone can be forgiven? And, our Christian beliefs say we should do this and so forth. What's our moral code? You know, because it's challenged, isn't it? Every day it's challenged. We do not know for sure until that question comes down in front of us. Then, what's our moral code going to be? What's our stance going to be? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out this whole transgression and redemption thing. If you kill a whole bunch of people, can you be forgiven? I don't think so. I think maybe you can get to a point, but you can't get beyond that point. So that was part of it. Now, I'm writing about, can we, with Street Freaks, I was writing, can we get along with people who are not like us? They're not flesh and blood, or they're not all flesh and blood, or they look like us, but they don't behave like us, Where's that middle ground, and what's it going to be, and how do we get there? And in particular with Street Freaks, if a human falls in love with an alien, how do we feel about that? And I really feel those kinds of questions are questions we all ask ourselves all the time. Not that one, but Well, no, we do, because I've had some instances in our family where one of the children fell in love with an alien, I thought.
He's talking about me and my wife. No.
Right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello. So this is more of a general question for an author. After living so long in your own world, and it might not be this way, but does it ever get lonely not having peers when you look across? You can't have people to talk to or invested in exactly the same thing, similar, but unlike a chemist or a computer scientist who has other people doing exactly the same thing, does it ever get, lonely being so long in your own, intimately in your own worlds?
It's certainly true that everybody is much better than I am, so it makes me feel depressed much of the time when I think, oh my God, look at all this stuff. I just got out of a panel where two of the authors on the panel have written more than I have, and I thought 40 books is pretty damn good. And Rachel Kane has written, like 80 or something like that, and she didn't start until the 2000s. I hate her. So I don't know. I have a lot of writer friends, and some of them I get to meet when I go to conventions like this, which is fine. But interestingly enough, and I don't entirely understand this, people don't always want to talk to me about books. What's wrong with them? Is there anything else in the world that matters? Nah. So I can, you visit with people, you connect with people on all different levels. And I don't see myself as being anything other than the normal person. That's how I see myself. I'm normal. I've got some strengths and weaknesses like everybody else. And I happen to have found a formula for writing books or a way of writing books that works. And so I've been very lucky that way, but that doesn't make me special.
Do you ever wish, though, to discuss about a character's feelings or maybe a little stub story in your mind that you want to share, but you can't because it'll give something away?
Do I want to discuss my work with anybody else? No. Actually, I don't. I have there's at least one person in the audience who edits my books who will say, he's terrible. He never tells me anything until I get the book finished. Then I have to go back and destroy his work and make him do it over. I don't work well that way. And the reason I don't work that well that way is because if somebody comes and talks to me about another way to do something, it distracts me. It derails me from where I am. And I find I'm much better with book writing if I just power on through with the story and make the changes that need to come later. I'm basically a one draft guy. I write one draft. I change the draft as I go. I do it chapter by chapter, and then I go back and change the whole thing. But I want that a finished product before I give it to somebody else to look at. And particularly, I don't want to talk about it. And a lot of writers feel this way, a lot. And that's because if you talk about what you're going to do, it leaches the magic out of it. It's like you've already done it, so now you don't need to worry about it anymore. You can just, it just takes everything away from it. It's like talking something to death or something, I don't know. But I can't do it. I hardly ever, even with Judine, who knows all things, basically, very seldom do I talk specifics about what I'm writing on until I hand her the manuscript and say, here, read this and see what you think.
Are you ever worried when Judine gets that book and what she's going to think about it? Like, do you have any kind of... She's your first reader of every book that you write.
She is. And, you know, your first reader should be somebody you trust. I trust her implicitly. We don't always agree. Ha ha! Husband and wife, you know what one does, what couple does. But I value her expertise in reading because she reads all the time. And she's a book person. She's a former bookseller. She's a former DM. She's got the creds to be able to, and she reads outside the field I'm in. And what I'm always looking for is input from somebody who doesn't just read fantasy or science fiction or in my area, because I need somebody to come in and say, I don't know what you're talking about here. Because if she doesn't know, a lot of other people aren't going to know. And my idea is make it accessible. Make it accessible to anybody. Make it so that you're telling the story in a way that somebody can pick up this book all the way from 8 years old on up the line and read that book and understand it. I think that's crucial to the way I work. And that's how I look at it.
Cool.
Hi.
Hi, so actually I do want to talk about books. I am a middle school English teacher. And
All right.
I teach 12 and 13-year-olds who tell me every day, I hate to read. And so my question is, well, two things. First of all, what helped inspire you at that age? And secondly, is there anything that I could take back and talk to them about on Monday from you as an author and say, listen, I got to hear an author talk about this, and something I could take back to my classroom on Monday? No pressure.
So this is all going to fall on my shoulders, isn't it?
You know, it's just the future.
Well, I'll just tell you. I'm back in school, aren't I? I don't know. You know, I had a couple teachers in middle grade, in 7th and 8th grade, that were huge inspirations for me as a kid growing up reading books. But I also was lucky enough to come out of a family where everybody read books. You know, my parents always read. There were always books in the house. I was busy stealing Mandingo when I was, you know, young. And there were always opportunities like that. And so I had that background and so forth. But I think that the answer is kids have to find their way there. And the biggest thing you can do for them is to, if there's an interest, you know, going on, give them something to read in that interest area. You know, that's what I hear most of the time from teachers about what they do. They said, well, you know, we may not teach fantasy and science fiction, particularly in our classes, although some now do. But we suggest for those kids that are struggling that they try this kind of a story, an entry-level story that has a compelling story. And then you can find out, or a sports story, or anything like the kid, that has an interest that the kid might be able to attach to and go from there. And, you know, not everybody likes what I do. And not anybody likes what anybody does. Too bad. I can't understand it personally, but there you go. So we just say, let's find something that they'll do. Sometimes even that doesn't work, you know. But this is what I tell kids. I said, a book is unlike any other form of entertainment because it's personal. It only happens one way for you. The way you read the story, the way the story unfolds, just for you. And so the way you see the characters, the way the characters behave, how you feel about them, all of that is very personal in a way that nothing else is. Nothing else. In a movie, you look up there, it's the same guys. They're there all the time. And everybody sees the same facial features and the same behavior and everything else. You can interpret what it means, but that's not the same as reading it as in a book. And it also is an opportunity to engage, which I think is really crucial. When you read a book, you engage. If the author's doing their job, they make you work, okay? So they don't give you too much about the description. They don't tell you everything about what it means. They make you think about it. They make you, you assume what happened in any story, and then you go from there. And if really doing the job right, then you get to the end, and the great white whale has destroyed the Pequod and taken everybody to the bottom of the sea except Ishmael, and Ishmael alone survives. Well, what happened to him then? Did he go on and marry and have a family and, stay away from seas and whales and stuff? But that sort of thing is kind of what's part and parcel of the whole deal. And people who read books want to be taken out of their lives. I mean, that's why we read books, to be taken out of our lives and put in a different story and in a different world, different place altogether. Because then, you get, it's like you recharge your batteries, you get reborn into the world. When you come out again, you feel like, wow, I just was on a vacation and I want to go back. And if you can convey that sense of wonder to a kid and get them looking at it in that way, sometimes that will help too. And I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Yes.
I had a couple questions. I know it's probably more in depth than what you would want to get into, but ever since reading Night of the Word and all of the Void and Words books and tied into the genre series, I was wondering, how does the Void and the Word work against each other in the genre series with like the King of the Silver River kind of stuff?
Next. Well, I think, in Word and Void as opposed to genre, it's very different. Even though it's the same. They use the same names, I use the same names, but it's very different. Word and Void is all about absolute evil being combated by what we interpret to be absolute good in our world. One struggling against the other. Oh, wait a minute, maybe not. Maybe not. And so the demons of the void, the knights of the word, they are the combatants who are the chess players with the human world. And the human world either feeds into or destroys all this, or inhabits it in some fashion. In Shannara, it's more complex. And there we have a whole backstory, history, that we don't have in Word and Void. We know that there was a fairy world before. We know that in the fairy world there was a war fought in which certain members of the fairy world who were considered bad were imprisoned in the forbidding by the good. Yep. And for a while we believed this is all, this is the way it should have been, because these are bad people. Although they weren't all bad people, and some of them got snatched up that shouldn't be there and trapped over there anyway. Which is, I kind of think, the way the world works anyhow. Some people get locked away that shouldn't get locked away, and So in that case, there's a less of a clear-cut sense of what's good and what's bad as between the Druids, who are in themselves flawed, because some of them are bad too and some are good. So, but in Night of the Word, we're talking about issues. This issue, and the fact that the destruction of the world is exactly what the Void is seeking to achieve. They don't want anything that's there right now. So I don't know if that helps. But then I always say the same thing. What do you think?
That's the problem. That's why I'm asking.
This is part of your job as a reader. You're supposed to, imagine this, think it through, decide for yourself what's what. If that mystery isn't there to some extent, then I'm not doing my job. I got to do a better job.
Thank you.
Good question, though. getting worse around here. Good thing I won't be here that much longer.
Good evening.
Hi.
I just wanted to thank you for a book that hasn't been mentioned this evening. Sometimes the Magic Works, Lessons from a Writing Life.
Yes.
This is amazing.
Really?
So I just love it, and it has prompted me to repurchase all your books. And,
Whoa.
and this is the beginning. This is the first book I'm starting with, and then I have an idea of what was going on when you were writing, for that matter, too.
I don't know, but I hope you're all listening to this.
Everybody should read it. So, thank you.
Well, the history is pretty simple, actually. They used to have a piece in the New York Times every Monday, I think once every month, maybe more often, I can't remember, called Writers on Writing. And the writer would pick a subject matter that had to do with the construction of a piece of writing and write about it at length. I read this and I thought, I can do this. So I called up my agent and said, yeah, I think I want to do this. I want to write a piece. And she said, well, let me check it out for you. And so she did, and I had already started writing down something about plotting or something. I forget which it was now. And she called back and says, you're right. You could do this. You can write it down. And when it's all said and done and you send it in and they publish it, they own it forever. And I said, ooh, I don't like that idea. So I guess I won't do it. So then I thought, well, I'm just going to write some of these on my own and I'll find something to do with them. So I wrote, I don't know, I wrote 4 or 5 of them. And, it's the same old story. Once you start writing something, you get new ideas and you get some impetus going on there. Yeah. I started out to write a book on writing. But it quickly evolved into a memory collection, not memorabilia, but memories of things that I learned along the way, of experiences I had, as I did with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and all the rest. I thought I'd just write about these. So those all came together, and until I had a book, and then I sent it in and said, what do you think? And they said, well, I don't know. I don't remember what they said anymore. They published it, though, so there it went. And I think people like it because it's short. It's only about 200 pages, and it is not a this is how you do it thing, because people hate those books.
Right.
I hate those books. All those books on writing that say you have to do it like this, and you have to do this, and no, it's bullshit. It's not true. It's not true. All writers function on a different level, and there is no one way to do it. There are multiple ways, and we see this happening all the time with the proliferation of new writers, new young writers coming out, and how they work, altogether different than how I work and everybody else, and that makes it I think, accessible to everybody to believe that this is how you work, but it isn't how everybody works, so they can all do it. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You wrote that book, oh man, how long has it been now? It's been
Eons.
15 years, maybe 14 years?
Oh, I think 20.
Have you ever thought about revisiting it with the new lens that we're in with how publishing works now? I mean, since you wrote that book, ebooks have become vital. Audiobooks have certainly ramped up in not only sophistication, but in sales. Have you ever thought about adding a couple extra chapters onto that book?
Nope. I sort of figure, that was a one-off. I did it when I did it. It was fine for what it was. It's still fine for what it is. But for me to start talking about how to be a writer now, at my advanced stage in my career and so forth, is kind of silly, because what do I know anymore? I don't know. People say, how do you get published? I haven't a clue how you get published. Good luck. Because it's different, the way people approach it now. Look at all the fan fiction that gets made into a book or whatever, and look at the way people come at writing from all these different angles that didn't even exist when I started out. My way of writing still exists, sending in a manuscript over the transom and good luck, but it's not the only way anymore, and I think that and I don't have, I guess, that coupled with the fact that I have no real impetus or desire to write anything further about that. I've discovered that as time passes, I have less energy. Maybe some of you have noticed this about yourselves. Not, you're all too young, forget it. But you will. And when that happens, you have to decide what's important. It's like touring. I can't tour like I used to. I used to do 6 weeks every year. I can't do that anymore. I'd be dead. So you have to say, all right, this is my focus. My focus is my writing. So that has to get most of my attention, rather. And everything else gets parceled out in the best way that's possible. So I think I will probably, the minute I say these things, something comes along, and the next thing you know, Terry Brooks writes another book on writing. But I'm not planning it. So my plan is to continue to write fiction in the same way I've been writing it for all these years, and to do as much of it as I can in whatever time I have left to do it, which I hope is a while, and to try and keep the level up and come up with some new ideas that excite me and you both, and that's it. That's the way.
What do you like doing outside of writing? What do you enjoy? What fills you up before you sit down in the chair every morning?
Sleep. He knows this. I get up at 5. I go to work because that's my when I'm alert these days is first thing. Well, not actually first thing in the morning, but let's say after the first half hour. And until maybe noonish, and then about that time I start thinking about naps and things like that. So I tend to work then. I don't know that I have any one thing particularly. My wife and I Judine and I do a lot of stuff together, obviously, that entertains us. I have gone to the dark side. And I watch movies these days on streaming. I even watch a series, which may scare you. But the things I watch and the things that I see tend to be more artsy than they are, say, science fiction, fantasy. I admit that. That's what makes, maybe it's because I need that break from what I do. And what draws me in with books and so forth, pretty much the same thing. I was just in this writers panel, and I think I shocked the bejesus out of them when I said that I really am, I don't read that much anymore in my field. Now and again, enough to stay involved. But it's the stuff that I would never see otherwise. I rely heavily on Judine to say, here's something you should read that will really change you. And I do. And inevitably, she's right. I read that and I think, oh my God, what a great story. I want to find a way to use this. How can I do it? And the answer is probably not, but maybe something will come along.
What would you mentioned a book at the end of the last panel. Can you repeat that book? Because maybe people, you seem to have loved it. What book was that? Maybe people want to check it out.
I have to call her and tell her I need money in order to do that. No, I did. I read a lot in young adult these days. A lot of it is very good, and a lot of it really gets to the heart of relationships. And because I'm not a young person anymore, in case you hadn't noticed, I'm not as tuned into this sort of thing as I used to be. So it's not like I'm reading about something I know all that much about. The book is by a writer named Deb Coletti, who's written, 8 or 10 books, 12 books, something like that. And it's called In a Heart, in a Body, in the World. And it's won all kinds of awards, and it's been, highly touted. And it's one of those stories about a kid coming of age who has suffered a traumatic event of some sort, but we don't know what it is, and we don't find out right to the end. There's a bunch of misdirections that suggest it might be one thing or another. It turns out it's not any of these. It's very clever. It's very well written, and I like those kinds of stories a lot. But I read a lot. And then with my panel, I had Rachel Kane, Gwenda Bond, who just wrote Stranger Things, the prequel for Stranger Things, Matt de la Pena, and if you haven't read Matt, shame on you, and a new writer named J. Patrick Black, all of whom are writing in areas that I wouldn't necessarily venture into except for Rachel. Well, no, really, all of them, but in any case, really good writers with good stories to tell, and all different. But I like to see that kind of energy, and I want to venture into areas where I haven't seen haven't been before where I can pick up ideas and thoughts that maybe will trigger something in my world of writing.
I want to give a shout out right now, just really quick. Maybe you can talk about we have 2 minutes left. You kind of helped start a book festival in Cannon Beach, Oregon. A lot of people here are local. This festival is great. Can you discuss that festival, how it started a little bit, and what you have planned this year for it?
Well, it's called Get Lit at the Beach. Double entendre, yes. And it takes place in Cannon Beach, Oregon. We do it the first weekend of April this year. It's moved around a little bit. The idea is not to teach you writing, because I could care less if you learn to write. What we're interested in here is bringing books, bringing people who write books and read books together to talk about what they love and why it's important, and to offer authors a chance to explain to readers why they do what they do. It's small, but because I know a lot of people, I know a lot of things because I've seen a few things, and because Eugene and I together, and a couple of the organizers know a lot of people, we've been able to get really high-end authors at this. And we try to bring in somebody from different, 4 people is our max. We bring 4 writers in, and each of them writes in a different field for the most part. So they're bringing 4 different experiences to you to talk about what they do. And you spend the weekend talking to them, listening to what they have to say. It's a hands-on, close-up, personalized experience that you can't find in very many places. You come here, and it's a great experience, but how much time do you actually get to spend talking to the people that you would really like to talk with, Well, with writers, maybe some. Actors? You've got to be kidding. It's hard, and you don't get those one-on-one conversations you'd like to get. So for me, it's been a joy, and my wife and I were part of the original organizing committee because the mayor of the town, which, by the way, is an honorary position. You don't get any money for this. It's small, resort community. Called together the owner of the bookstore, Cannon Beach Books, and the 2 of us, and sat us down and said, you know what this town needs? This town needs a literary festival of some sort, some kind of a book festival. And we said, you're right, it does. And he said, great, go plan it. I'm not kidding you, he did, and then he was gone. That was it. I thought, for crying out loud, that was not fair. But we did, we put it together, and then we've been doing it ever since. And this year we'll have Pierce Brown. If you're a reader in this field, you'll know Pierce. Deb Coletti will be there. That's a shout out for her, and a writer named Carol Casella. And a couple other smaller writers that are going to do lesser known writers who are going to do a panel. But we've had a lot of Elizabeth George has been there, and
yeah, it's good. I highly recommend it. It is a wonderful weekend.
Yeah.
So we've run out of time. And I thank you all for coming out. I thank Terry for putting up with me. Terry, I think Terry is signing tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for 2 hours in the writer's block just over here. So yeah, if you're still around, bring your books in, say hi.
Yeah, thanks for your attention.
Yeah.
I appreciate it very much. Appreciate all the years of support you've given me. I try to say this when I go to any book event. It means so much to have that kind of support, and particularly, as Judine says all the time, you are the best fans. You absolutely are. You should see some of the other writers' fans. Let me tell you. So thank you.
Thank you.